Hey everybody, it's me and Fotis. We just returned from Colombia. And how long were you there, Fotis?
I was for a week.
Yeah, and I was for 2.5 weeks working at El Suelo, and it was pretty hard work, I guess.
Yeah, really hard.
But while we were there, we took a little tour of the farm because, yeah, not many people actually know how our farm looks like, and yeah, so we wanted to show you our coffee farm. How was your impression of it?
It was really good, like really steep hills and hidden trees, and
Yeah,
yeah, really nice.
yeah. Do you think it has a good future?
Yeah, of course, especially the new area. It's like amazing to see how the trees they
Yeah.
were progressing from March to October.
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about our farm, continue watching, and we'll take you on a little tour of our little biological coffee farm in Colombia called Finca el Suelo. Ciao. So we are not live, but today I have with me my colleague and roaster and barista Fotis from Greece.
Hello.
But he's working for us in Norway, and we are going to take a little tour of Finca el Suelo, our farm, our biological coffee farm in Colombia. And it's right behind us, so let's take a walk. So the farm kind of starts here, on top of this hill. We planted a lot of geisha. We have about 450 trees. There's a plantain for temporary shade, and we also planted shade trees and pigeon pea in rows. So we'll take a closer look at that a little bit later. The farm is all this hill, goes all the way down to the forest you see down there, and there's a little stream there. Here's a little new area that we have planted, and we are preparing some more land to plant another 420 trees in January. So we're just about starting that now. So right next to El Suelo there's a road that divides us, and on this side we have Finca Tamana, which belongs to Elias Roa. So since I don't have a house on my farm, I would stay at Elias's farm when I'm working on Finca el Suelo. How is it staying at a farmhouse for this?
It's great.
Yeah,
It's amazing experience.
good food,
Good food, always food. Hard work,
hard work, yes.
hot.
Hot and humid. So now we're at one of the corners of the farm. We're gonna go and have a look at the geisha trees that we planted. Some of them were planted in January 2018. They look a little bit better. There's a couple of trees that are left from when we planted in 2015. And then we also planted a lot of trees this March, which is 2019. We're gonna have a look at those, and then we're gonna see some other trees that we planted in the same month in March, but they're doing much better, and I'll tell you the difference afterwards. So this is one of the geisha trees that we planted in March, but we didn't put wood chips around immediately, and you can see how it's suffering. This tree will probably not survive at all. And right next to it we have another one that was planted in March 2019, also not so great. And the way we planted these trees were just make a hole with a machine, so it's like 20 centimeters deep maybe, and then we put a little bit of cow manure in mixed with soil, and then put the tree in. And then 2 months later we put compost on the top of the soil because we didn't have any ready compost when we planted, and then wood chips around. This one might survive. We have given it some love this week. So Fotis is now sitting next to a shade tree that we planted. We find a lot of this type around here, and it's supposed to grow quite fast. Can't really remember the name from the top of my head, but it's supposed to be quite big in 5 years, they say, but that's when you fertilize with mineral fertilizer. It takes a little bit longer when it's organic. So this was planted at the end of 2018, and right next to it you can see a little plant here. This one. This is pigeon pea that we planted a couple months ago. So the whole idea is that we want to plant a row with pigeon pea to give like temporary shade, and you can see one here. Normally it'll stand up like this, and grow to about 2 meters. So when they're like 40 centimeters apart, they will create like a little hedgerow and create temporary shade for the coffee. And it's also a leguminous plant, so it teams up with a rhizobium bacteria in the soil, and those bacteria colonize the roots and produce nitrogen. So they can take free nitrogen from the air and kind of fix it into the roots, and when the roots die off or get eaten, you have a release of nitrogen. And also when the leaves from this pigeon pea falls to the ground, it's nitrogen for the plant. So it's kind of free nitrogen. In some areas we will see that they have grown quite well, but here not so much. So this behind me is our best performer. This is a geisha tree that we planted in 2015, January 2015. And you can see it has a lot of cherries. There's even some red cherries here, but we're not going to pick them until maybe next week. But this is kind of I'll switch the camera around so you can see it in full. But it's maybe 1 meter and 50 centimeters tall, and it's growing quite well. But it's the only tree that's actually having a good harvest so far. That's from 2015. And actually in 2015 we planted 9,000 trees altogether. And out of those we have maybe 100 left. Some of them are geisha and some of them are typica and some katura. And then we replanted now in January 2018 and a little bit more now in March 2019. So we lost most of the first trees basically because we didn't really know how to do this. So we're learning as we go. So here's another shade tree we planted last year next to plantain that we also planted last year. And because we gave it quite a lot of cow manure, all these plantain grew really fast. We have another one that we planted in 2015 that is probably less than a meter tall, maybe 50 centimeters. So cow manure really helps to make these plantain grow. And this is pigeon pea when it's grown up. It grows really fast, but when we plant it, it's really difficult to get it to grow without watering. And we don't have irrigation here, so we have to wait for the rainy season, which is a couple of times a year, and then plant it right in the beginning of the rainy season when the soil is wet. And that's when we've had success with the pigeon pea. You can also see another shade tree in there. These little ants are one type of ants that eats leaves. They actually don't eat the leaves, but they cut off the leaves and flowers from trees. They take it into their nest and they will kind of farm a fungus that they eat from. So the leaves is kind of food for the fungus. This is a big problem on the farm, and so far we've seen how many Fotis, maybe 4 or 5 big nests.
Huge.
Yeah, and it's difficult to get rid of them, but we can use a fungus called Boveria basaini or something like that, and the fungus will actually attack the ants and then get rid of it. But you have to kind of kill the queen in order to remove these ants. So we're going to walk along some geisha trees. You see here, this is also from 2018. This is from 2018, and this one is also from 2018. So you see just next to each other they can look quite different, and they actually didn't used to look this good just last year, but I've learned to be a little bit smarter with the wood chips. You can see down here there's kind of a little open area where there's no wood chips, and there's like a wood chip like a donut around the tree. This is very important so that the tree can kind of breathe. If you have too much wood chips around the stem of the tree, the roots will grow into the wood chips. So when you have a dry season, the roots dry out and the tree dries out. So when we kind of started making this donut, put compost underneath, we started applying a much more compost extract. Now some fish hydrolysate, we've used manure tea. The trees are looking much better. And the reason why they're so yellow, you can see the leaves are quite yellow. That's because we haven't had rain in 4 months. But did it rain yesterday?
Yeah, like crazy.
Yeah.
Finally.
So finally we're having some rain, but it's been 4 months actually without anything. This here is a yucca, cassava, some people call it, that people eat the roots We actually planted it for temporary shade. It's not giving a lot of shade, but we're keeping it in the soil because roots feed bacteria and fungi, and we want to have life in our soil. So that's, you can also see there's a lot of weeds. We've learned to let it grow quite much, especially during the dry period, and then cut it when it starts to rain, so that we don't really kind of expose the soil too much for hard sunlight. So we want the weeds to kind of be there during the sunny, dry season. So this kind of plant here is perennial peanuts, and it's also a leguminous plant. And we just planted a little bit here and there, but it spreads quite aggressively. And it's kind of good because it suppresses weeds and it's a nitrogen fixer. So this will also produce nitrogen in the soil. But it's the bacteria that colonize the roots that is actually producing it, but people call it nitrogen fixing plants. So this is also another shade tree, but this was planted a couple of years ago. So you see it's growing. It's growing, it just takes time. And a couple of more years now and this will be a very efficient shade for the coffee plants that are around. And we planted several hundred of these shade trees. You just can't see it at the moment. We will see it in the future. So here you can see the kind of little square in the middle here. That's the area that I planted in March 2019 with pigeon pea and an Ethiopian landrace variety that I really don't know what is. And you can see there's a worker down there digging holes. So we marked 420 holes yesterday, and today they're starting to dig 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters by 60 centimeter holes. We make them big because we have figured out that the trees grow much better in these big holes than if you make a small one. One of the most hard things to do is to actually work on these steep hills. So this is how steep the hills are.
Oh my God.
And if you look sideways, it's kind of a challenge, especially when it's wet and rainy. It's quite slippery. I actually fell today with a 20-kilo sprayer on my back, but it was okay. So here's another one of our old geisha trees. This is from 2015 and looking a little bit better now, but it's been struggling for a long time. There's one behind me here as well. There it is, right there. That's also a geisha tree. So this banana tree here, or plantain, it's actually plantain, it's like a frying banana. We planted this in 2015, January. It's not grown very well because we didn't give it any cow manure or anything. This one, however, was planted 8 months ago. So you can see it's quite a big difference. So it's incredible what a little bit of cow manure can do. And the idea with these is to give temporary shade until the shade trees are grown. Then we're going to cut them down and obviously use everything as mulch or compost some of it. So this is part of Finca el Suelo. On the flat part there, behind the plantain tree, we'll build a house eventually, hopefully. And a mill on the hill there, and then down to the forest here we'll actually plant more trees and just make sure we have more forest on the farm. Might put some coffee trees in there too, but we want to protect the forest here because there's a little stream there and animals can move from place to place through these kind of corridors. So that was the geisha. We're now heading over to the typica, which is behind us, and the geisha was in front of us. So the typica trees we actually planted in 2015 as well. And there's only like 80 left, and then we're going to go down to the Caturra, which is on the corner of the farm. We planted 1,000 of them, and we have 16 left. And the typica we planted 2,500 in 2015, all of them. So we'll see how the conditions are, and you can see the difference. When the trees are not planted side by side, it's much more difficult to keep the soil alive. It's much easier when you have these kind of row crops. So we'll see the difference there. Watch out for snakes, Fotis. This is the hill that we planted the typica trees. There's not many trees left here. We planted plantain the same time as the other ones, but as you can see, they haven't grown that much, although they got cow manure and everything. The soil here is really rocky underneath, very dry, so it's difficult to get stuff to grow. And I should have been much better at putting on wood chips and everything in the beginning, compost, to make this soil change a little bit. This is one of our typical trees. It's actually flowering today. You want to smell?
Jasmine.
Jasmine, yes, and citrus, I think.
Yeah.
Smells like coffee flower. This tree is from 2015, and finally it's flowering. You can see the kind of first flowers here. This is the kind of flower buds, and then they will open like this. Arabica is self-pollinating, so you have both the male and the female in the flower, and then after a while you get these little, I don't know if you can see, these little buds that becomes coffee cherries behind my finger here. Takes about 9 months from flower to cherry when it's ripe. Still in our typical lot, we're approaching another tree. It's looking pretty good. A little bit yellow, but it's going to flower as well. You can see here, these are all going to flower. So this is the northern corner of the farm. You can see a hedgerow there behind Fotis. That's actually Tephrosia. It's similar to pigeon pea. It's a leguminous plant, and we were recommended by the FNC, or a previous agronomist from the FNC, Federación Nacional Cafeteros, Coffee Growers Federation here in Colombia, to grow these because they provide shade and nitrogen. It's been quite difficult to get it to grow, so that's why we switched to pigeon pea. But let's go and see some really nice trees over here. So for this is one of our typical trees that was planted in 2015. You can see it's been partially eaten by some insects here. There are some flower buds, some buds that are about to become cherries. So it flowered a couple of months ago. And is there some cherries here? No. So we picked 3 cherries from this in, I think it was in June this year. So I roasted it, didn't taste so good. It was a little dark. And behind is a little shade tree that's been growing quite well. So here's another tree affected by leafcutter ants. There's some coffee cherries left, but maybe they will become red, but they won't be very sweet and ripe because there's no leaves to produce sugar on this tree. So the tree now needs to focus on producing more leaves and not so many cherries. So focus. So this little corner we have 16 Caturra trees, and they're growing underneath of some shade. So the only difference we've done here is just we planted them into this forest soil, or kind of semi-forest soil. Now these 2 top ones doesn't look too great because they have a lot of sun, but look at these ones. They were all planted in 2015 as well, and although they're growing slow, they're quite small. Fotis, can you stand next to it?
Yeah.
So Caturra is a short variety, so this is dwarf variety. But you can see how green it is. And also this next to it has a lot of flowers. It's quite green. This is very green, very nice, despite that they haven't had a lot of water for the last 4 months. So this is how coffee trees should grow. And what we're trying to do on our farm is to plant more shade so that the trees can look a little bit more healthy. So we're preparing a new area this week and next week. Here we will plant 420 coffee trees, more or less, and shade trees, and pigeon pea. But you see the little square in the corner there. We're going to go there now and have a look at the trees we planted in March 2019, so 8 months ago. And we can compare those to the geisha trees you just saw that were also planted at the same time, but with a different technique. So the only difference is that in the little green square you see in the left corner, we dug holes that were 90 centimeters wide, 60 centimeters deep, and 60 centimeters long, I guess. And then we put weeds and stuff in the bottom with some compost, cow manure, mixed it with soil, left it for 2 months before we planted the tree in the middle of that hole. And those trees are doing much better. Let's go and have a look. So this is our new contours where we're going to plant trees. So all the marks represent where we're going to plant the trees. And we actually used an A-frame to measure up 2.5 meters by 2.5 meters more or less, but we're following the contours of the land so that it's level. And we do this to collect the water so that it doesn't erode so much the soil. Now we're going to plant pigeon pea on the rows. So this is planted the same time as those young geishas, March 2019, 8 months ago, more or less. And it looks so much better because they're planted in those deep holes. And here's another one that's not doing so well, but the majority looks like this. Very green, very healthy. Despite the long dry period, they're very green and growing fast. So we can see this technique is doing us very good, and that's why we're using it for our next plantings. So this is how it looks like when we dig those big holes. They're 60 by 60 by 60. We keep the topsoil here and the clay that's underneath here. The clay will become like a contour where we're going to plant the pigeon pea. And the topsoil is going back into the hole with weeds, compost, wood chips, manure and so on. And that will decompose in the hole. Duvan has been digging half the day. Tomorrow we're actually bringing a machine in that will drill 4 holes and then we'll dig out the rest, so it's a little bit faster.